Frances.
And I'm David.
It's been 2.5 years now since you last saw us on Australian Story.
And we thought that you might like a little bit of an update about what we've been doing for the last couple of years. Unfortunately, it hasn't really rained, and we're now officially in drought, so there's not been much grass to watch.
But on the upside, we've had lots of wonderful people come to visit us at Wooleen and share a little bit of our life and our story. So I guess we're still here, still standing, and looking forward to bringing you a bit of an update.
I don't ever regret my decision to go to Wooleen, not at all. I just love it so much and everything that we do with the environmental rehabilitation and all the things that we get to achieve together, and I certainly don't ever wish to be anywhere else. When I think back to the 14-year-old girl that did her Year 8 speech on banning the live export trade to the girl that now lives on a cattle station and has a far deeper understanding of the environment, of agriculture and how the whole system has to work together. Yeah, it's funny to look back on that. I suppose for me it was a very romantic idea to start with, being out there with David, and he would just take me to some of the most breathtaking landscapes. So I just came out for a brief 2-week working holiday and I didn't leave.
We called her and said, you know, you've got to move on. It was time to come back to Melbourne and start her studies. She said, well, I'm not coming home.
I don't think I would have made it through the first year if Frances hadn't come along. I guess I was going on a bit of a wing and a prayer and hoping that I would get through.
It was ambitious to think that he was going to be able to survive, certainly to this point where we are now. The fact that he's achieved that, I think, is a credit to him, because I certainly didn't see how I could have done it.
Wooleen's about 700 kilometres north of Perth. It's in the mulga shrublands of the southern rangelands, in the oldest landscape on Earth, at 3.6 billion years old. Wooleen was settled in 1886 by the Sharp family. It was like a small town. It had a lot of people working here, a lot of Aboriginal people, but also we had a blacksmith shop, and there was probably 60 or 70 people on Wooleen at any time during the early part of the century.
It was a very affluent lifestyle, so they had beautiful big black tie dinners right up until the 1960s. Sewing rooms, ironing rooms, kitchens, cooks, big veggie gardens, fruit trees, everything you think of. Now really it's just David and I and a few backpackers at the homestead.
Australia relied on properties like Wooleen to generate the wealth. There's an old saying that Australia rode on the sheep's back. Well, it's very true. The main exports that earned a lot of income for Australia was wool, and that went on for many, many years, about 60, 70 years, and that's what this country was founded on.
It's gone downhill since big drought in the 1930s, when a lot of the sheep died and there was massive erosion and degradation in the countryside, and really the countryside's never recovered from that, and we've had a few droughts since then which have made it worse.
The stories that my fathers can tell of saltbush that was higher than a man on a horse and all the rest of it, people just totally stocked some of these places to the extent where they were running 40, 60, 70,000 sheep, not cattle, sheep. And they just totally devastated these property through greeds.
I've got really fond memories of going to Wooleen as a child, and then I jackarooed there. Then in 1989, I had the opportunity to buy the property, and I flew across there and signed a contract that day for over $1 million. That was pretty exciting. especially when my wife asked me how much we had in the bank, and I only had $1,300.
I want to show you a better one this time. Go!
Certainly that Murchison rangeland is something that I basically, I think, was born into and have never truly separated myself from. And Wooleen is just one of those places that we grew up, but it was more than just a home. It feels like that's where we belong.
Uncle Kid, this is the playground. Now, there's swings, that slide.
I think anybody that lives in that red dirt sort of country sort of gets it in their veins a little bit and learns to love it.
It was everybody's home forever until basically my mother passed away.
My wife had died, and I decided that I couldn't live on Wooleen permanently at that stage. Richard came up and gave up his job to look after the property.
With my then partner, now wife, Heidi, we went back and took over the station and started running it the way we wanted to run it. We changed the station from being a predominantly sheep station with some cattle to all cattle. But it was still Dad's asset, and until Dad decided what he wanted to do with it, and it was always an unknown.
Succession planning in any agricultural business is very, very hard. Both boys wanted to take on the property, and the two boys wrote a submission. Richard, he was married at the time, so he had other financial commitments and the ability to go on and do other things because he had done other things away from the property. David, on the other hand, had been away at university and travelling, but only had one passion, and that was to be on Wooleen.
Richard and I, or maybe Richard more than me, decided that we weren't going to work together. I was willing to give it a try, but to be honest, you know, he was probably right. We probably wouldn't have worked together very well. But so Dad had, you know, a huge decision to make. I really wanted to try and do things differently. It's quite obvious to me that what's happening out here in the pastoral country is just not sustainable, not environmentally sustainable. And if it's not environmentally sustainable, then it's not going to be economically sustainable either, because everything that we produce comes from the environment. And to my mind, that meant destocking. But that's a big step because you make your money out of stock.
Both boys had a different view as to how the property should be run, and my eldest son had a more traditional view, which I agreed with. And David had the radical view, which I came round to.
There's a certain element of shock, and then it's how you recover from the shock that defines you as a person, I think. Well, I certainly am lucky enough to have a partner that was very supportive, and we were able to move on and without having a huge setback to our lives. So when we initially were asked to leave the station, it was requested that we do a final muster and remove all the cattle from the place so that when David came home to take over, he could basically start his regeneration in the rangelands. We felt that, well, what a waste. We're just sort of getting the herd up and running. We've started from scratch. We're just starting to get the genetics coming through, and some of the infrastructure was, you know, where we wanted it to be. And now all of a sudden we were going to leave it, and it was just going to basically go back to nature. And we put all the cattle on a truck, and effectively when the cattle left, we followed them out. And the day we left was the last day we were there.
It was a big worry. There's a young man up in the bush. I spent quite a bit of time up there helping him.
Dave had been on the station for 6 months at that point by himself when I arrived. So it was March 2008 when I got there. My main interest for going out to Wooleen was to experience the outback tourism. The station itself was very interesting to me, but it was more the tourism enterprise which was the attraction. It was never anything permanent. I always thought I'd just stay a little bit longer and a little bit longer, but I slowly fell in love with the station and the tourism and of course David. There's just so much wildlife, especially birds. Lots of beautiful landscapes, big granite outcrops, the most amazing sunsets and sunrises you'll probably see anywhere. Looking at the landscape, it still does look very pretty, but once you get somebody starting to point out the problems, you start to look at it with fresh eyes.
What the other people thought when he radically destocked totally was where was the finance coming from, how he was actually going to keep afloat, because the debt level might have been fairly high, totally destocking like he's done, and I think that's not what pastoralism is about. Pastoralism is about livestock.
To remove all of the cattle was a huge decision. Turning off all the windmills too was an extremely radical thing. Dave turned off all the watering points and the windmills on the station because of the grazing pressure which was being inflicted by the kangaroos and goats. With access to permanent water, they can continue to breed and their populations explode in areas that previously they would have perhaps died or moved off without the permanent water.
Do you think if we put a bank in here, some of these blue bushes would start to come back down again?
I think so. They probably wouldn't grow in the bank itself, but around the...
Now I have an understanding of the land. It's certainly a passion I've taken on with Dave.
We've really got to do something about this erosion channel here, because that's just going to keep getting worse. If we put the bank in here, they should establish around either side. We borrowed a concept called a ponding bank from a chap named Bob Purvis, north of Alice Springs, and he's used these conservation earthworks to fix eroded gullies and trap water high up in the landscape and grow grass species, which then seed themselves down those gullies and start to heal the landscape again. We also invented wire mesh structures that we put in high flow river areas to try and slow down the water and spread it back over the floodplain. We can see this debris coming down here, coming down, getting caught in the enviro there.
I was totally sceptical of the whole project in those days. Now, if I could afford it, I'd be buying a lot more and doing it.
David, he's determined and I'd say stubborn. He's not going to do anything in half measures. So he was so determined that this country had to be regenerated or he didn't want to be part of it. What they've done at Wooleen is drastic. To totally destock the property means cessation of income.
There's only going to be 6 people for dinner.
How they keep bread on the table, I don't know. You know, I haven't seen their financial returns and how much money they make out of tourism, but I can imagine it's a big challenge.
It doesn't get to us that often. I suppose it's most likely to become a bit tough for us over summer. More towards the end of summer, I suppose, when we haven't had an income from stock or tourism. And it's sort of those last couple of months that we're just trying to get by.
We close over summer because it's just too hot and our power system can't handle air conditioners.
That's when it's at its most difficult. And you sort of got to wonder whether it's worth it.
Francis has had to learn to live by a new way of life in a way. I mean, all the luxuries and things that she took for granted here, they're not out there at Wooleen. It's quite different. And we couldn't understand why our daughter would want to leave what we've got here and go out into the middle of the outback, to nowhere.
It's a beautiful place, though, isn't it?
It is a beautiful place.
Yes. Yeah. And I do see why she fell in love with it, apart from falling in love with David, but Yeah, she just fell in love with what was out there as well.
They really are exemplars, but people would say foolish exemplars, but who cares? They are actually going to give us the data that can help us understand how to meet that challenge of regenerating the landscape.
We do a lot of monitoring together. We take our laptop and photos from previous years that we've taken out to sites.
Looks like this line of sandfire at the back started off in a recent flood.
We then look at old photos and take a new photo of that particular site.
The recovery has really been amazing and much greater than I thought and much quicker than I thought. And a lot of these species I'd never seen before. I'd heard about them and I guess I knew what some of them were, but just to see them recover and come back is just amazing, phenomenal. Initially with the destocking we wanted to concentrate on the Wooleen lake system. It's normally a dry lake and only fills once every 9 years.
Hi.
Hi. We just want to have a bit of comparison for how quickly the lake is being flooded. It's a nationally important wetland. It's a freshwater lake, unlike a lot of the inland salt lakes. It should have a grass that grows all over the lake bed, but that grass had been receding over many years. And initially we wanted to try and get that grass back onto the landscape, back onto the lake bed, and the recovery that we've seen on the lake just in 4 years has just been phenomenal and well worth the investment of not putting the stock on for those few years.
And the best thing about this is the country. The country is just bloody magic. After 140 years of sheep attacking it every day, and tens of thousands of them, plus tens of thousands of kangaroos and goats and other vermin, and yet the country can still come back relatively on its own if it's nurtured. It's pretty special.
I am actually impressed with the way he's actually worked it, but it's still a long way to go, and to actually see the results is years down the track.
It'll probably be quite a long time, like it might be sort of 15 years before it really starts to pay itself off, and I guess that's a big part of why a lot of pastoralists are not doing it.
The idea isn't just to make Wooleen a nice little oasis for us. Dave once said, you know, he's trying to find a sustainable way of to graze cattle in the southern rangelands. It's not just about Wooleen, it's about the whole picture.
If the station, for whatever reason, doesn't succeed under the regime that David's implemented, everyone will know that he's given it his best shot. And no one's going to live with the what if. I think the what if is if Heidi and I had stayed there, the what if would have been that, all right, the station was still running, but was it running as productive as it should be in, say, 50 years' time?
155 straight, landmark at Waroona, Richard Pollack, 155.
We haven't been back because I'm very fond of the memories that I have, and I'm nervous that if I should go back and things have changed, then my memory and perception of things may be altered. Perhaps not necessarily the way I want them to be.
Hi Francis, what are you taking a photo of?
I don't harbour any regrets about what Francis has done. For all the different things that have happened to Francis and the experiences that she's had, you can't have any regrets. I mean, she's a confident young woman now who really knows what she wants in life. And, you know, she got that experience by going out to Wooleen.
The winner of the Sir David Brand Young Achiever Award is Francis Jones.
In 2009, Francis started a degree in ecotourism through Murdoch University and studies externally at the station. In late 2009, she took the position as chair for the Gascoyne and Murchison Tourism Incorporated, and in mid-2010 was elected to the board of Australia's Golden Outback.
See those patches of grass that are greener?
No, that's where the kangaroos are.
The prospects for Wooleen are exciting, but because of the finances and the debts, it still hangs on a knife edge as to whether we can continue the project. But it's a very, very tough call, and it's a very tough call on a young couple to try and achieve this within the next 10 years.
Coming back to Mount Macedon is always a really lovely feeling to be home. I guess it's so different to Wooleen.
It's wonderful having Frances back. It's always great seeing her, and David too, to have them come home.
We probably get to Mount Macedon every 18 months or so.
How are you? Very good. Welcome.
Sometimes you wonder what it's like on the outside a bit.
It took probably a period of a couple of years of us going there, them coming back, to understand him and his sense of humour. Welcome home and welcome to Mount Macedon.
He loves Francis, you can just see that. And, well, we just love him, so it all just sort of works.
Well, have you had much rain at all?
The last 2.5 years have been, I'd say they've been a bit of a roller coaster in one sense. So we've had some more highs than lows, but, you know, there's always a couple of lows in there. Just can't avoid them. Unfortunately, we've had 2 years where the rainfall has been well below average.
It hasn't really rained since the last Australian story. We're not getting the winter rains, which we used to do and which the area really relies on. The drought puts a hold to all the land regeneration sort of stuff.
I think the regeneration work certainly risk-proofs the station against the highs and the lows. Certainly the situation's not getting worse, which is sometimes what can happen in a drought. It's nice to know that we're just holding our own as it is.
The plants that we're trying to re-establish are essentially preparing us for when the drought breaks and those first rains come. The bank's not knocking on the door like it was 2 years ago, and that's the product of the fantastic tourism sort of seasons that we've had. We're still nowhere near out of the woods, but it's certainly a lot better than it was a couple of years ago.
I do think in the future Dave and I will be able to knock down the debt. We just have to work really, really hard towards what we're doing. I never thought that, you know, at my age I'd be dealing with such a huge debt. And it's not really one that I necessarily created myself but walked into as a business. For the last 2 years, Dave and I have had about 200 head of cows on Wooleen. Our lease conditions state that we must run cows. It's certainly not tempting to just run cows full time, to have a full herd of cows out there knowing that, yes, maybe we could address our debt issues much quicker, but watching what it might do to the landscape, it wouldn't be worth it.
What's been really disappointing is the government's response to the new leases coming up. They're effectively trying to make us sign a lease that traps us in for the same sort of problems that we've got for another 50 years. Two things need to happen. We need a stewardship payment to pay to pastoralists so that we can destock and start to heal the land. But a problem that we need to start working on now is that of land tenure.
They need to be moving away from purely a pastoral lease to perhaps a rangelands lease that allows traditional pastoralism to continue, but it can allow for conservation, for tourism, and that would certainly reduce the grazing pressure that land is under if we were more able to do different things.
Is that the one that's last year's go?
My relationship with my brother Richard is definitely well on the mend. He's my stock agent as well. So whenever we sell cows, we sell them through here and through him.
You know, that's really lovely. You know, if ever we've got questions about the market, what's going on, you know, David can just call Richard up and they have a bit of a chat.
I feel that the responsibility to manage Wooleen very strongly. And I do wonder, you know, if I don't succeed and we go broke, we have to move, you know, what will the next person be like? Like, how will they treat Wooleen? That, in part, is what sort of drives me on, because I'm not sure that anybody else is going to put the same passion into the landscape rehabilitation anyway that I have.
Even if the change is slow, we can't walk away from, you know, the environmental impacts of what's happening in the rangelands. We stay because we want to.
I think in a lot of respects, you know, Francis has made my life worthwhile, also made what I do worthwhile.
Mine and David's relationship is going along strongly.
She hasn't asked me to marry her yet. Seems like we don't really have the time or the money to get married at the moment, but I'm sure that we'll get married eventually.
I think Wooleen would be an amazing, probably, environment for kids to grow up. Wooleen is what makes us happiest, so that's where I see us.